Okay, so today we're going to be talking about the market revolution, and I need first someone to help me define what the market revolution is. It's a transition from something to something else. What's the from? Yep. Absolutely. So subsistence what? Can you finish those phrases? Yeah, so the transition in the market revolution is the transition from subsistence production, which is almost exclusively agricultural, right? People are have all small family farms, and they're making everything. Subsistence means that you have to make everything you need to live, to commercial-based or market-based agriculture. So Jennifer's not wrong. There absolutely is an element of industry that begins to grow very slowly here, sort of on the tail end of the market revolution, as a result of the same kinds of things that make the market revolution possible. But the market revolution is not, I repeat, N-O-T, capital letters, underline them, stars all around them. The market revolution is not about industrialization. This is not the industrial revolution. This is the market revolution. We are moving from producing just for ourselves, subsistence, to producing for a market. That's the transformation that's happening in the market revolution. We're going to talk about what's required for that to happen. And then, yes, one later effect is going to be that it's going to be made possible for us to begin to slowly grow industry, but that's not what the market revolution is about. Everyone's with me? So the market revolution is about the transformation from subsistence agriculture to commercial agriculture, or what we call market-based agriculture, which is why it's called the market revolution. So, okay, to begin with, let's talk about what is needed for a market economy to exist. If we're going to have this transformation, it's not like nobody ever thought it'd be a good idea before. So what is required to be in place for this to work? Yep. Okay, you're absolutely going to have improved transportation. Because if it costs me, way more than it's worth for me to transport my stuff from here to a market somewhere, then it's never going to happen. So we're going to have to have improved transportation. Absolutely. What else is necessary for the market revolution to occur? I'm going to twist what you said. You're not wrong, but I'm going to twist it to help us. We actually need people to supply with food. We can improve productivity on our land. When you're living in a subsistence way, you can probably produce more than you do, right? You just produce a little bit because you only need a little bit of whatever it is, but if you wanted to, you could produce more, right? So it's not that hard to scale up agriculture, to produce more than you were already doing. But if you're going to do that, you have to have someone to sell it to, right? So if no one else wants to buy your extra produce, then why would you make it? You understand that? So we're going to have someone to sell it to. And of course then, so what you really told me is what's needed for urbanization to occur. We have to have people to produce food for urbanization. But it's also true to say that urbanization allows the market revolution, because as we have more people living in cities who aren't able to produce their own food, they create the demand that then encourages farmers to begin to produce for a market. Okay, what else? Keep thinking. I mean, you're not wrong, but keep talking because that's not enough. You're not wrong, but tell me, what do we need for that to happen? Okay, we need a unified currency, right? So remember that Hamilton had lobbied for and successfully gotten the charter of the Bank of the United States, yeah? But that charter expired. It wasn't infinite, so it expired, and the Bank of the United States was all gone by now. So there was no national bank. As a result, the state banks were the ones kind of in charge. And the state banks, although the Constitution specifically tells them that they're not allowed to coin money, the state banks were effectively coining money by producing things called banknotes, which were kind of like writing checks, but you understand checks function as currency, right? So it was effectively the same. So we have to have better currency, which is going to mean we need a national bank. But there's a bigger reason we need a national bank. I'll help you get there. If I'm a farmer and I want to sell to a market, but I also have a family to take care of and a house to defend from raiding Indians or whatever, can I afford to be gone for several weeks taking my crop, however long it takes me to get to the market? The answer is obviously no. So therefore, what do I need? I need middlemen, basically. So yeah, so somebody who's going to be the salesman, who's going to come and buy it from me and then go and take it to market. But for those middlemen to operate, what do they need? If you're a middleman, are you likely to have enough capital to a month and a half before you're ever going to get paid, be able to have enough money to pay me for my whole year's worth of production? The answer is no, and so therefore you need loans, you need credit, right? So fundamentally we need a stable currency, but we also need credit that's available, and they're related. So I'm going to give you a little economics lesson, and we're going to start talking about strawberries, because I know that you're going to know the answer to this. So somebody tell me what happens in the summer when the supply of strawberries is high. In the summer, they are less expensive, right? In the summer, I can buy a pound of strawberries for like 98 cents. It's amazing. My children eat strawberries like they have no other food. And that's great. But as we move into the winter and the supply of strawberries drops, right, because now the only strawberries that are being grown are like in Central America, you know, where the climate, or like in greenhouses, which are also expensive. So the supply of strawberries drops, and now what happens? The price goes up. Heavens, you know, like, it costs like $4 to get a pound of strawberries these days, which is a lot of money. Anyway, so you understand that when supply of something is high, usually the price is low. And when supply of something is low, usually the price is high. You all understand that based on the grocery store. So now we're going to talk about something slightly more complicated, which is money. So when the supply of money is high, you're going to expect to tell me that the price of money is low, right? Supply is high, then the price is going to be low. But the question I have for you is, what is the price of money? Well, its value is not really its price. Its value is going to measure like how much stuff I can get with it, but it's not really the price of money. Think of it this way: if Tristan has some money and I don't have any money, and I want to buy some money from Tristan, what am I really asking for? I'm asking for a loan. And so what is the price of that loan? Interest, right? So the price of money is interest rates. Yeah, everyone's with me there? The price of money is interest, because if I'm buying money, I'm getting a loan. Or if I'm selling money, I'm loaning money to somebody, and the price of that transaction is the interest rate. So when the supply of money is high, what happens to interest rates? They are low. And when the supply of money is low, interest rates are high, right? Okay, now what happens when interest rates are low? If there's lots of money floating around, the supply of money is high, thinking about like when the states were in charge and they could just print banknotes whenever they wanted to, and we effectively had no limit to the money supply. Interest rates were low, and what happens? Well, yeah, a little bit of inflation, but we want to focus on something called speculation. So what happens is people borrow a lot of money, right? Like when the price of strawberries is low, we buy a lot of strawberries, you know? And so when the price of money, when interest rates are low, people borrow more, right? We have lots of people are taking advantage of that. They get lots of loans. Well, what are they borrowing money to do? Well, what mostly happens at this time is something called speculation on land. So, you know, this is pretty early in the 19th century, and most of the land in the West is kind of worthless. You know, like there's so much of it, and there's nothing out there that, like, who would want to buy that? But it is getting more valuable every day, right? As we move further west, as we begin to connect the West via canals and, in a few decades, railroads and so on, like that land will become more valuable. So one of the most significant places that people borrow money to do, or things that they use this borrowed money to do, is to buy up land that they don't really need. They're not buying it for themselves. They're buying it speculating. What does it mean to speculate? I speculate that it might rain tomorrow. Yeah, they're predicting, they're speculating that in the future it's going to be worth more. So they bought it just to sell it. Do you understand? They bought it just to sell it, hopefully for a higher price in the future. Which is cool. It's like investment. People do that. It's a thing. It's like that's not a problem necessarily. But if lots of people do it, because interest rates are low and everyone's borrowing money, if lots of people do it, then it turns out that everyone buys up the land and that nobody actually needs it. You know, like we all bought it hoping to sell it, but there's not many people who are coming to buy it. And as a result, lots of us go bankrupt, you know. And then bad things happen because we can't pay back our loan because we couldn't sell our property that we were speculating on. Everyone's with me about how that's a problem? So if the supply of money is too high, we can have a lot of speculation. Of course, if the supply of money is too low, that means interest rates are high, and that means people are not going to be, well, not going to be speculating, but they're not going to be getting loans. And that can be bad too, right? Because can we expand? Can we see economic growth if people can't get loans? No. So what we need is the Goldilocks principle, right? We need the just right interest rate. And of course, we need a national bank to be in charge of that. So, okay, we're going to need a national bank to regulate currency in order to, like, promote credit. We need to make sure that credit is available, and also make sure it's not too available. Anything else you can think of that we're going to need for the market revolution to succeed? So we need a national bank. We're going to need better transportation. Well, they do sell pretty well. So we haven't said communication. how will I know what to produce or how much to produce or when a middleman is going to be available or which city is, in the market for some corn or whatever if I have no communication? We got to have better communication. If we are all isolated in our individual communities, we will never know. We will never be able to make this market system work effectively. We have to be able to communicate with one another. Can you think of anything else? I'm sorry? Yeah, so we've really covered the basics. Like, to get the market revolution started, we've talked about what we need. We need a stable system of credit. We need better transportation. We need better communication. But then Amy's bringing up the next step. As the market revolution gets going, well, to sustain it, we're going to need better technology, right? Like, if I told you that farms are pretty easily scalable up. Like, it's pretty easy to increase production on your land. But after a certain point, to increase production, you're going to need technology. So we're going to need new technologies to help us to be more productive on the same plots of land, especially as urbanization grows. Anything else? The last piece that I really want us to get to doesn't really necessarily answer the question that well, but I want you to be thinking alongside the market revolution of the word specialization, right? It's kind of more of like a consequence of the market revolution, like as you begin to figure out to sell for the market, you begin to specialize. But it's a word that you really need to associate with this piece of history. So as we began to produce for the market, I used to produce everything I needed. If I wanted to have cotton clothes, I had to grow cotton, and if I didn't, then I had to raise sheep so that I could have wool to clothe my family. Like, it was not an option. You had to produce whatever you were going to get, whatever you're going to use. But now, under the market system, I'm going to specialize. I'm going to pick really just one thing to produce because that makes me more efficient. That allows me to produce more of it at a lower cost. Because why do I need to produce more at a lower cost? Because if I'm specializing and I want some cloth, do I have that? No. I've got to do what? I've got to buy it. So I have to have money, right? I have to actually make a profit so that then I can go to the store and get all the other things I need. If I'm not producing vegetables, I need to be able to go to the store and buy some vegetables if all I'm producing is, cotton or something. So that kind of comes as more of a result of the market revolution. But okay, so I want to check, make sure we did it all. We got it all. So we've talked already about the Second Bank of the United States. It is chartered in 1816. We know that the bank is necessary. And oh my gosh, you guys, we have finally reached the day. I mean, we sort of talked about Henry Clay before, but here's the day. Can I tell you a really fun story about Henry Clay? Yes, I can. So here's the thing. Anybody know how old you have to be a senator in the United States? 30 is the answer. There's no real reason you would have it memorized at this point in your life. But you have to be 30 to be a senator. But the senator from Kentucky, Henry Clay's from Kentucky. We should all be from Kentucky if we were cool. Anyway, Clay's from Kentucky, and the senator from Kentucky, I don't remember, dies or does something bad, whatever. He's gone, okay? And so the governor of Kentucky has to appoint someone to fill the place. And he appoints Henry Clay, who's this really young guy. He's 29. He is not old enough to be in the Senate. But he appoints Henry Clay because Henry Clay is awesome. And so Henry Clay goes to the Senate and serves out this term and, is amazing. And then he's like, the Senate's boring. Not much is happening there. All of, the big bustling business of the day was happening in the House of Representatives. So he goes back to Kentucky and he runs for the House of Representatives. He's old enough for the House. You have to be 25. So he runs for the House. He wins the House. So then he goes back to Washington. His very first day in Washington, his very first day as a member of the House of Representatives, he's elected Speaker of the House. That would be the leader of the House, the most powerful position, unanimously. I'm not making it up. It's a true story. 100%. Because he's that awesome. Anyway, so Henry Clay is here, and he has this plan to save America, right? So he believes that the path forward is commerce and industry, and he thinks that the national government needs to use the tools at its disposal to do those things. Is he a Federalist? Why not? They don't exist anymore. They all fizzled out after the War of 1812, right? So, his ideas we might have associated with the Federalist Party, previously speaking, but that party doesn't exist. Now it's the era of good feelings. There's only one big national party. Democratic Republicans are really the only party, and everyone's in that party. So he's one of the pro-statist members of that party, and there are some pro-local government elements of the same party, but they're all in the same party. So he's Democratic Republican. Anyway. So Henry Clay is going to lobby for something he calls the American system, which we're going to do an activity about later. And there's like three big pieces, but the first big piece of the American system is the national bank, and he is amazing, and he is super successful, and they pass the Bank of the United States, no problem. So the bank is chartered, yay. But the thing is, the states have been doing their thing for a really long time, since the first Bank of the United States charter expired. And the states have been issuing those banknotes left and right. And the second Bank of the United States, this bank that Henry Clay helps to charter, is not able to solve the problem fast enough. And so in 1819, we have a panic, an economic problem. Like we might call it a depression, but it was a little bit shorter than that, like we would think of a depression. And the panic was caused by just what we talked about earlier, speculation, right? There was too much money floating around. The second Bank of the United States was not able quickly enough to solve that problem after it was chartered. And so we have this huge amount of speculation, and the bubble bursts, and we have this panic. We're going to have another big problem in 1837, which will be blamed on the bank, but it's actually Andrew Jackson's fault. He is our arch nemesis. We all love Henry Clay, and we hate Andrew Jackson. And so we'll get there later, but that's that for now. Okay, so here's an interesting statistic for you. In 1840, approximately 1/3 of the United States lives west of the Appalachian Mountains. You should have two responses here. The first is 1/3 is not that many. Still, fully 2/3 of America live in what is effectively the original 13 colonies, like the land east of the Appalachian Mountains. So still, we are very concentrated on the coast because the West is very wild. It's not the Wild West of like the 1880s that we're going to think about like Wyatt Earp movies, but it's pretty wild. On the other hand, you should also think, wow, 1/3 of Americans, 1 in 3 Americans live in this vast area called the West. So the West is really growing at this time. And as we move west, it becomes painfully obvious that we need improvements in transportation. I think I told you before that people drowned in potholes. That's a thing. The road quality was so terrible. So I told you about how it would be faster to take something from Pittsburgh to float it down the Ohio River and then down the Mississippi and all the way around, the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic Ocean to get to New York than to charter, to carry it over land. So we know that we have to improve transportation. Another big piece of Henry Clay's American system, Henry Clay, you guys, he's amazing. Another big piece of Henry Clay's American system is this thing he calls internal improvement. He's going to lobby for the federal government to help to pay for improving transportation, like something like the National Road, which will be paid for partially by the national government. Now, remember, what was Hamilton's biggest weakness in his three-part plan? The tariffs, right? The bank was controversial, but the tariffs don't pass. This is the biggest controversial piece of Henry Clay's plan. The National Road is funded, but internal improvements are really, really controversial, and really there's not much more that's done. Like, other than the National Road, there's not much more that we can point to of, like, things the national government does to improve transportation. It's because states got so mad, because, like, the National Road, it goes through, like, 4 states, but it only goes through 4 states, So we're, like, asking the whole country to help pay for something, like a project that's only in a few states. Now, you would argue, yeah, but we'll do a project in your states later. You should help to fund this, but it was very controversial. So internal improvements were the weakest part of Clay's plan. The first piece passes, but then very quickly it meets resistance, and we don't see much more than the National Road. Did you have a question? Yeah. Okay. So we need transportation improvements. So we do see a little bit of improvement in road building, but the biggest improvements come through improving water transportation. Water transportation is amazing because you can carry a huge amount more with less power, right? Like if I have a ton of corn or something, and I want to carry it over land, I'm going to have to break it up into like 5 or 6 wagons. I have no idea how much a ton of corn is, but whatever. I have to break it up into several wagons. I'm going to need several horses to pull each wagon. You understand that, like, because of friction and all kinds of other stuff, that it's going to be much harder to transport it over land. Or I could load the same ton of corn on a single barge and float it down the river for way less energy, right? So that's why water power is such a big deal at this time. And one of the biggest revolutions in water power is the invention of the steamboat by this guy named Robert Fulton. You want to know his name? Robert Fulton invents the steamboat in 1807. Now this is really exciting because all of a sudden we could always float stuff downstream, but then we had to walk all the way back upstream, like it's a long way and it's really slow and there's danger and so on and so forth. And if we want like trade, like I'm going to float stuff downstream and sell it and then like bring stuff back, like the stuff I buy from the market or whatever, you can see how that would be a problem, So the thing about steamboats is they can go upstream, which is really cool. I mean, there's this like minor drawback that they tend to explode fairly frequently. But mostly people say worth it, like people still, they still use steamboat. Eventually they work out most of the kinks. They don't explode as often later. And so, probably not. There's probably plenty of safety features these days. But at this time, anyway, so steamboats are a really big deal. Another really big deal in water transportation is what was called the canal boom, which begins with the construction of the Erie Canal in 1825. So you guys know how canals work, right? You dig a river. You dig a river deep enough for a boat. Can I clarify that? Like I could dig like, a river an inch deep or something. But you dig a river deep enough for a boat, and even cooler, you dig a river deep enough for a boat that can allow a boat to travel on water uphill. How do you do that? Locks. So locks are pretty cool. They work like this. So the ground, let's say it's up here, and then the ground, you kind of build this ground and whatever, and then you've got to like manage to bridge this gap, right? So you can like fill in dirt to make the ground level like even to here, but you got to fill in this gap. So what you do is you make a series of locks. So your little boat, is sailing this way. He's not sailing. Most canal travel is barges pulled by animals. So you can see in the picture there's a barge in the middle and you can see like the footpath on the side. Those are like horses or oxen that would be tied, like harnessed to the barge. And the horse or oxen would just, you could have just one on both sides and it would be able to pull a really heavy barge. But anyway, we're just going to use my little sailboat here because I can't draw animals. So here we go. The little sailboat's coming this way, or little boat's coming this way, and then these locks are basically big gates. Okay, so we're going to open the gates, and the boat is going to come in here, right? But now somehow magically we have to get the boat uphill, right, on water. So we're going to close the gates behind the boat, and then we're going to open these gates. And what's going to happen? Yeah, all the water is going to flow in, right? It's going to flow down into this like lower elevation. So the water is going to flow in. When will the water stop flowing? When it's even, right? So the water will flow in till it's here. And then now the boat, which is like floated its way up, they're going to open these gates, keep these closed so the water level stays even. You don't just like plummet. He's going to like go ahead and sail on, and then they'll open those gates, and then the water will flow out, and they do the whole process again. This is pretty amazing engineering. Did I mention they have no like excavators or like power tools? All of this is done with literally people with, like shovels and pickaxes and, like hand saws. Like all of this technology is done in this pretty amazing way. So the Erie Canal is built. It connects the Hudson River to Lake Erie, which basically connects not only all of New York State with New York City via the Hudson River, but also basically the entire Great Lakes system. Anyone who can get to the Great Lakes can then sail into Lake Erie and then use the Erie Canal to transport. So it's going to be a really big connection, and it makes them a lot of money. The Erie Canal people, these are private people. It's not a government-funded project. It's a private project. The Erie Canal people make a lot of money. And so that starts off what we call the canal boom. And lots of people try to build canals. And for a while it's going well, but eventually, kind of like speculation, you overbuild, like you need 4 canals going to the same place, probably not. And so then eventually it sort of like falls off. Also, eventually the railroad takes over. But for about 20 to 30 years, canals are the thing. Because parts of like the old Northwest, this like Ohio River Valley, Great Lakes area that had previously really not been connected to the east, all of a sudden they are. And so these places now can produce for places like New York City in a way they never could before. And then finally we'll talk about the railroad. It is really important to me that you hear that the railroad is not that important until the very end of the period we're talking about right now. Like period 4 is roughly like 1800 to 1840-ish. I'm not sure exactly what the College Board dates are, but something like that. And although the railroad is like invented in the 1820s, and like the first commercial railroad is the B&O in 1830, that railroads are not a significant source of transportation until the 1840s and 50s, really, right? Like it takes a long time. Because the early railroads were like almost experimental, You would make a locomotive, you'd make this steam engine, and someone would like have it circling their pasture, Like it's sort of more of a curiosity. We're practicing, trying to figure out how the steam engines work. Locomotives also had a nasty habit of exploding every now and then because this steam engine technology is kind of new. So it takes a while. It's going to be much later. So I don't want you to think, like in the market revolution, what's the most important transportation development? See, it's water, broadly speaking, and if we're talking about technology, we would talk about steamboats, right? So railroads, they do begin in this time, but they're going to be bigger later. Like, this is not the era of the railroad. Most people are never going to use a railroad during this time period that we're talking about. They're much smaller. Okay, so we'll also talk about a need for communication technology. Big invention, the invention of the electrical telegraph by Samuel Morse. That one's pretty easy to remember because how do you communicate via telegraph? Morse code, right? So Samuel Morse invents the telegraph, Morse code. Remember, that's important because if we're going to sell to a market, we've got to know what's at the market. Other technologies we talked about needing, helping to improve productivity. Cyrus McCormick is going to invent the mechanical reaper. You can see it is still horse-powered, but it is mechanized labor. So it allows, instead of me, like if I've increased my farm size, and I'm trying to harvest several more acres, and I can't just do it with my farm hands, like my children, then rather than hiring more workers, I could get a loan and buy this machine, and then me by myself can harvest the whole field because it's going to enable me to go much more quickly. You should know, what did I say? I had to do what to get this machine? Get a loan and then buy the machine. So here's the sad story for farmers in pretty much all of U.S. history. They are always in an incredibly precarious situation. My grandmother and my dad's family were farmers. And it's incredibly precarious because your whole life, first of all, you have to wait all year for your income, right? Until harvest, you get your income. And all year long, literally anything can ruin your crop, like too early a freeze, too late of a freeze, not enough rain, too much rain, a storm, not a storm, like so many things can go wrong. So you're dependent, you have no idea, there's so much uncertainty. And on top of that after we begin to commercialize, we're producing for the market, there's really no way to get around the need for credit. Like, you have to have some kind of like mechanical something. You have to have technology in order to like be able to compete with other farmers and ever make a profit at all. But to get that thing, you have to take out a loan. Or you have to expand and farm a larger territory. But to get that, you have to get a mortgage. You have to be able to expand. So farmers are always going to be in this really precarious balance of uncertain income and like the need to go into debt in order to like make a profit as they produce for the market. So it's sort of sad for the farmers. Oh, one more farm thing. John Deere invents the steel plow. Why is a steel plow a thing? Like, why do we care about steel? It's way stronger than iron, right? Do you know what sod is? Yeah, so later on we're hearing about sod house. Have you ever sawed your lawn? They look like carpet squares, but it's just grass, and then like the little root system and the like all the dirt that gets kind of caught up in the roots. And look, when you sawed your lawn, the carpet squares are like this thick. They're like the grass squares. They're very thin. But in the Great Plains, like west of the Mississippi River, as we begin to move there here in this time period, the sod can be somewhere between 6 and 8 inches thick. So that like layer of roots and dirt that's all caught up together and is essentially a solid mass, 6 to 8 inches thick. How do you think iron plows do in 6 to 8 inch thick sod? They don't, is the answer, right? They break really quickly. So the steel plow will be important as we begin to expand into new territory. Remember, the market revolution means we're producing more agricultural stuff to produce for a market. Well, guess what? We need more land to do that, and so on and so forth. Okay, so industry does begin to develop, but it's very slow. By 1840, the country is only 8% industrial. So less than 1 in 10 Americans, or less than 1/10 of American economic production is made through industry by 1840. So remember, it's still a tiny, tiny, tiny piece of all of this. But you can see, of course, how industry would be encouraged by the market revolution. We have available credit, that's important. We have agricultural production to support an urban population, that's going to be important. We have new technologies which are going to allow industry to develop, that's going to be important. So you can see why industry is related to the market revolution. But one more time, it is not the same thing. It just happens to come on the tail end, but it's not what the market revolution is about. One of the most important things that we need for the market revolution to be successful, or for the growth of industry to be successful, is the invention of interchangeable parts by Eli Whitney. Eli Whitney. So Eli Whitney, before Eli Whitney invents interchangeable parts, if you have a machine of any kind, a tiny machine like a gun, or a giant machine like a mill or a steam engine for a train or whatever, you had any kind of machine and a part broke, you either had to throw the whole thing away, or you would take the machine to a machinist, a skilled worker who's obviously going to be very expensive, who would then carefully take your machine apart. They would carefully measure, and they would have to individually craft a replacement part for just your machine. And you can imagine that's a very long process. You would be out of commission for a while. It would be very expensive. It's not efficient. But Eli Whitney invents the idea that we would create machines to particular specifications so that I can mass produce. Like I can produce a part without a machine to make it go to. And that part will fit every machine that I make according to these specifications. And that's a really important thing because remember, when did England begin industrializing? Like the 1730s, right? They're like what we're doing in the 1830s, they're doing in the 1730s, these like early, very small mills. So they've had almost a century ahead of us on this industrialization. And they started out slow. Remember, they didn't have interchangeable parts either. They had to it was all really inefficient and they're figuring it out and so on and so forth. When America really begins industrializing, which really happens after the Civil War on a big scale, when we really begin industrializing, in less than 40 years, we're going to go from basically nobodies in the world of industry to being better than Britain and Germany combined, which were the two industrial powers at the time. So we go really fast. And one of the things that allows us to be so efficient or to be so quick at sort of making economic progress, is that we do things efficiently. We also have a lot of really cool things in our favor, like this huge abundant labor supply and all of these resources and so on and so forth. But things like interchangeable parts means that when we start factories, our factories are more efficient. They cost less from the beginning. Really good question. Britain didn't let them. So Britain is aware that one of the biggest reasons for their continued economic dominance and political hegemony is the fact that they have almost exclusive claim to industrialization. They start way earlier than anybody else does. And they have a really strong program trying to avoid anybody getting any information about their factories. No one's supposed to go into the factories who doesn't work there, and if you're not a British citizen, you're not supposed to have access to super tight control of this information. Until Samuel Slater. And to be honest, I don't remember the story. It's probably a really good one that I can't remember now. But Samuel Slater somehow he goes to Britain and he manages to get inside a factory. I don't know if he's posing as somebody or if they think he's a British, I'm not sure. But they show him around and he sees all these cool things and he has a pretty photographic memory. So he basically figures out the plans by just seeing what's happening. And so he sketches some things down. He might have stolen a document or two. He sews them into his coat and sails back to America, where he has all of this information about how to basically start the first water-powered mill. And this is a really big deal because this innovation was going to be way harder for us to figure out on our own. And so Slater's mill, they are water-powered, so to have a mill like Slater's, it has to be on a river that is relatively fast-moving, right? You've seen them in movies, right? It turns a giant mill, which spins the whatever little axle thing, and then that causes the machine to move. So Slater's mill is sort of the first step towards industrialization for us. And then as things grow, we'll begin to see, ultimately we figure out steam-powered mills, so we don't just have to have a river, we can also create steam. And the Lowell mill system is a really great example of early industrialization in America. We were committed to not having the British industrial system. We were not going to be have these cities that were filthy and had all these poor people in them. We were not going to have destitution. We were going to have nice, clean, rural factories. Doesn't make any sense when you think about it. But we were going to have our factories all spread out in the countryside, and our factory workforce was going to be really well taken care of. And so Lowell pioneers it. It works okay for Lowell in the beginning because there's very little competition, right? There are very few factories to compete with. So the fact that Lowell is kind of far away from all of the suppliers out in the countryside, not that big of a deal because it doesn't matter. And the fact that they have all these extracurriculars basically for their workers, they have poetry night in the newspaper and civics classes and whatever, isn't that big of a deal because they have no competition. They can afford to spend a little more on their workers. The Lowell system really only lasts as long as there's very little competition. Once we begin to see more factories develop, well then all of a sudden Lowell is cutting their benefits to their workers and asking their workers to work longer and cutting pay and so on and so forth. And we begin to see the same factory system where factory workers are paid peons and having to work these crazy awful hours because it becomes competition, right? To keep up with another factory, I've got to undercut them on price. And if I'm going to cut my prices, the only way I can do that is by cutting my costs. And labor is one of the easiest costs to cut. So thinking of the market revolution, remember that it's not just economics. Of course, we've spent, my focus today was to help you understand the economics, because I think that's the hardest thing for students to get sort of from a book. But don't forget that there are big cultural impacts as well. First of all, there's this idea of economic nationalism, right? this sense that America is self-sufficient and our economy is growing and the government is supporting it. Like, this is a time when we're feeling a lot of pride in the country, and the market revolution is part of that pride. But then there are also broader cultural shifts. Like, what does freedom mean for an American? As we move towards producing for a market, you have less control over your life and over your like economic outcome. You know, like when you're a subsistence level farmer, I mean, obviously there can be a bad weather year or something and you have some trouble, but mostly you can kind of take care of yourself. You make do, you have some stores, whatever. But if you're producing for a market, you can do everything right and have the world's best weather, and for whatever reason, there's too many other farmers producing the same thing, so the price plummets. Or the city is having had to lay off a bunch of workers because a factory went bust, and so no one's buying, and so you're not able to make a return. It can be things completely out of your control, and you can really struggle. So this notion of like who had control over your life, and what kind of freedom, the day of a farm worker versus a employee, either of a bigger like commercial farm or of a factory, is very different. If I'm working on my own farm, well, yeah, I'm working really long hours, but I decide if I want to milk the cows or feed the chickens. I decide if I want to come in and have a glass of water at 10 o'clock and then go back out. Like, I get to pick all those things. When you work for someone else, your time is not your own. They will tell you what time to arrive and what you will be doing and what time you can take a break and so on. And so, like, the way that life looks is really different. Another thing that I want to talk about is gender. And we did this a little bit when we did our conversations about the chapter. Remember that before the market revolution, the notion of, like, women belong in the home wasn't a thing people would have said because everyone was in the home. Like, all activity happened in and around your home and your farm. But even though we do see actual economic opportunities for women in places like Lowell during the market revolution, the like ideology surrounding gender really changes. And now that there is work outside the home and work inside the home, the respectable women are the ones who can stay home. We begin to see pictures like this that idealize this idea. Okay, so we'll stop there. And on Monday, what's happening? Chapter 10 is due.